little while back, I did a video on Navik the Red, a brutal dictator who may or may not have been part of the New Republic government, as well as a follow-up on the retcons around him. But Navik wasn't the only bad bloomfruit trying to spoil the bunch in the New Republic government of Star Wars Legends, so today we're going to go over 3 of the other worst political and military leaders of the New Republic. We'll start, of course, with the Bothan that everyone loves to hate, Counselor Borsk Fey'lya, who rose as far as the position of Chief of State before dying in the invasion of Coruscant during the Yuuzhan Vong War, and there's going to be a lot about the Yuuzhan Vong War today. When Borsk was introduced in the Thrawn trilogy, he was essentially supposed to represent the selfish political interests which had grown within the New Republic as it established itself. Instead of looking out for what was best for the galaxy, or at least the New Republic, Borsk engaged in politics as a way to gain more personal clout. Even in the face of existential threats like Grand Admiral Thrawn, Borsk mostly would just see that as a chance to eliminate a political rival, specifically Admiral Akbar, allowing him to position himself as the supreme commander of the New Republic's military, even though he had very little actual military skill or experience. The X-Wing books extended this into being part of a longer plan to establish at least one Bothan higher up in the New Republic's military, with Laren Crafei, an admiral who shows himself to be nearly incompetent during the lead-up to the liberation of Coruscant. Despite all of his wheeling and dealing, or perhaps because of it, Borsk entrenched himself pretty firmly within the upper echelons of the New Republic's government for the rest of his life. His leadership role within the Bothan spy net during the Galactic Civil War granted him and Bothawai significant influence in the New Republic, which is why he was able to become Chief of State about 20 years after the Battle of Yavin, despite further scandals surrounding him, like his attempt to cover up both an involvement in the destruction of Kamaz, which was resolved when the names of specific Bothans involved in disabling Kamaz's planetary shield were brought to light, allowing Borsk to kind of back off his attempt to defend the Bothans. I actually think Borsk ends up being used in some interesting ways. The New Republic is never really made to grapple with the after effects of anti-alien bias in the Empire, and how that could still express itself within the New Republic. Unfortunately, Borsk is pretty much always the one used to bring this up, and him being the messenger kind of poisons the well for any real examination, and something similar happens in the Diversity Alliance book and the Young Jedi Knight series. Despite how often he decries humanocentrism, which is often linked to political power in the core, Borsk is more than willing to support other forms of disenfranchisement in the galaxy when he leaves the Outer Rim to the mercy of the Yuuzhan Vong and denied the threat the Yuuzhan Vong posed as a whole. His opposition to the Jedi and denial of the threat of the Yuuzhan Vong nearly led to the galaxy being overrun by the invaders, although he does manage to redeem himself a little by the end, cooperating more with the Jedi and sacrificing himself to like this video and subscribe for more. Also to kill many Yuuzhan Vong warriors in around his office in the Senate Rotunda, but that's less important. Our second character for today keeps us in the Yuuzhan Vong War, which is really when we see the New Republic most established, and including the widest array of possible people, so it kind of makes sense. This is Senator Viqi Shesh, representative of Kuat. She was raised as part of a wealthy family on Kuat, and the origins of her influence show just how callous and opportunistic she would always be. When Kuat of Kuat, who was basically the most powerful of the planet's plutocrats, killed himself, taking 1/5 of the planet's shipbuilding facilities with him, Shesh's family dropped in influence during the rebuilding. To counteract this, they reached out to the New Republic, knowing that the New Republic was on the rise, and having good relationships with them before other shipbuilding families on the planet would lead to a lot of profit later. Once the New Republic took control of the planet, this meant shipbuilding offers flooded to her family, and they wouldn't get out of bed for an order of less than 1 billion credits. Shesh went into marketing on Kuat, but in about 19 ABY, she made the transition to politics, financing her political campaign with family money and being hailed as a skilled dealmaker, as well as a breath of fresh air within the Senate, given her lack of political experience compared to the wads of cash she had already made in private industry. She took up the cause of helping refugees, which led to her being appointed as the chair for the Senate Select Committee for Refugees. This would become a massively important position as the Yuuzhan Vong War began in 25 ABY, given the massive refugee crisis caused by the Yuuzhan Vong displacing many people on the worlds they took over. This crisis lasted way beyond the war, since a lot of the planets they took over were also devastated, some left entirely uninhabitable. Viqi was only really interested in her own political power, though, and believing that the New Republic would lose the war, she leveraged the influence she had in Selkor to ingratiate herself with the Yuuzhan Vong invaders. As one of the people chiefly responsible for the movement of refugees and where they were going, She was perfectly positioned to give the Yuuzhan Vong either information on where refugees would be going, or even to just set up shipments that would lead to the refugees heading directly into Yuuzhan Vong hands. These refugees would then either be implanted with coral that allowed the Yuuzhan Vong to turn them into soldiers working for their side, or they would be ritually sacrificed to the Yuuzhan Vong gods. Ultimately, Shesh's double dealing caught up to her, and she chose to take a short walk out an open window on Coruscant rather than face either of the sides she had played off against each other throughout the war. She became disposable to the Yuuzhan Vong, and she had no interest in spending the rest of her life in a New Republic prison. The final character we're talking about today was, you guessed it, also in the Yuuzhan Vong War, Senator Pwoe. Pwoe was one of two senators from Mon Calamari, alongside the Mon Calamari Grand Marab. Mon Calamari was always expected to have a seat at the Advisory Council, and it was assumed that Ackbar would take that seat after he left active duty. However, support started to form behind Pwoe taking the seat, which Luke Skywalker suspected was Borsk's doing, as a way to block Ackbar from getting more influence as his old political rival. The push for Pwoe caused Ackbar to fully retire. Unfortunately for Borsk, Pwoe harbored his own political ambitions, so it was less a true alliance between the two than Borsk picking what was, in his mind, probably the lesser of two potential rivals. Despite being on the Advisory Council with Borsk himself, Pwoe was still considered to be the biggest adversary of the Jedi on the Advisory Council. He was one of several members to essentially condemn Luke's lack of leadership in the Jedi Order, with the Jedi kind of doing whatever they wanted in the galaxy, while also blocking Luke's attempt to create a new Jedi Council. When Borsk was killed and Coruscant fell, Pwoe tried to position himself as the new Chief of State, despite having never been elected and him having no real authority or claim to the position. In that position of fake Chief of State, he ordered Wedge Antilles and several of the New Republic's best soldiers and military leaders to hold the planet Borleas at all costs. Borleas was an important military access point through Coruscant, so if they could hold that, it would give time for the rest of the political leaders allied with Pwoe to make their way to Mon Calamari, where they could begin to plan a surrender. Curiously, the political leaders not aligned with Pwoe were stated by Pwoe to have died on Coruscant after he definitely totally didn't just leave them behind. Ultimately, Wedge didn't die defending Borleas and managed to strong-arm Pwoe into providing enough resources to mount a reasonable rearguard action before retreating. But once Pwoe made it to Mon Calamari, other senators and political leaders he'd claimed had died started turning up, like Cal Omas, and calling for a real election to happen. Pwoe did absolutely horribly in the election, never gaining much support. By the time the election was over, everyone seemed to pretty much openly hate him. Thrackan Sal Solo, cousin of Han Solo, and someone who would be on this list himself if he were more of a leader within the New Republic, said the following about Pwoe, quote, "Up until now, I'd thought the Jedi were the most pompous, annoying gasbags in creation. But that was before I met you. You take the prize for the most preposterous, self-important, prolix fiasco I have ever seen. And on top of that," he stared at close range into Pwoe's indignant eyes, "on top of that, sir, you are a fish. So sit down and shut up before I take a harpoon to you." I obviously disavow the fish slur and any harpooning threats, but yeah, Pwoe really sucked and nobody liked him. That's going to do it for today, though. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about these three jerks. Remember to leave a like and subscribe if so, and I hope to see you next time.